behalf of the Board of Advisors of the Future of California Elections, I'm Rosalind Gold. I'm the chair of the Board of Advisors, and I have the great privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, the Honorable Alex Padilla, California Secretary of State. Secretary Padilla really exemplifies the theme of this conference, leading the way, because he has charted a course in this state for so many innovative and visionary initiatives that have made California's elections accessible to all of its citizens. He sponsored the new motor voter law, and as a result, that has helped bring about 1 million, at least 1 million new registered voters onto our voter rolls. Our state had record voter registration and election turnout in election 2016 under his leadership. He's also worked tirelessly on behalf of the Voters' Choice Act, which you're going to be hearing a lot about today, and the efforts to implement it in a sound and effective manner. Secretary Padilla's been a public servant since at least 1999, where at the age of 26, he was elected to the Los Angeles City Council and served 3 terms as council president. He also has had a distinguished career in the state legislature, where again, he carried on his leadership on a variety of election issues. And in 2015, he became the first Latino to serve and be elected to Secretary of State in California. Finally, Secretary Padilla is a fierce advocate for protecting Californians' voting rights. When the purported Presidential Commission on Election Integrity, quotes, tried to get personal data and information from our voter databases, he was the first Secretary of State to say, no, it is not going to happen. Secretary Padilla has shown a willingness to roll up his sleeves and an unprecedented openness and spirit of collaboration to work with county election officials, community leaders, civic organizations, to work with everybody who cares about our democracy and wants to strengthen it, and to roll up our sleeves together so that we can get it right in the state. For these reasons, Secretary Padilla, since he took office, has been a keynote or featured speaker at every Future of California Elections conference. Thank you. And I hope you'll join me in welcoming him. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosalind, and good morning, everybody. Good morning. We all awake? We need another cup of coffee here? Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It's been my honor to have spoken at every Future of California Elections conference since my first election. And if you remember the first time, because I just got a flashback, we still had a newborn at home. He was a couple months old. It was like one of my first outings out of the house when I shared with all of you that I asked my wife for permission, and she said, you have to be there. And so it was a quick trip to Sacramento and then back in 2015. But thank you all for inviting me to speak again this year, my first and my second term as Secretary of State. So I think this is a good sign that we're working well together and that there's actually a lot of work both that has been done that we're celebrating, but that we have yet to do. I want to take a moment to also thank the Irvine Foundation for initiating what has grown into the Future of California Elections as we know it today. 8 years ago, right? So this baby's 8 years old now. It's a couple years into grade school. It's probably playing Little League Baseball. We're developing our personality. I want to thank and congratulate Astrid for your tremendous leadership. Right, the next generation of folks. And of course, our Secretary of State family that's very well represented here today. James Schwab, Chief Deputy, Jana, the entire elections team that's here, Tiffany, Sam, Robbie, one of our newest additions. It's helping all the VCA counties. Let me have the entire Secretary of State family stand up. I see Lisa going from our legal team. And Susan's not here, but our testing and certification experts are back here as well. So before I get into my Future of California elections talk, let's talk about the future of FoCE for a second. Because it has been 8 years and we have matured and there's a lot of great work to show for it, but I am aware, as are most of you, that it's not just the where do we go from here conversation. You know, what are we going to focus on? What are we going to work together on? What are the priorities? What's the agenda? But as an organization, you know, do we have the resources, or how do we ensure the resources necessary to keep this important work going? And so I urge all of you to, yes, brag on yourselves. Celebrate, bring other people's attention to the results of this collaboration and the partnerships that have been created, the very helpful and informative research that has resulted from these partnerships and collaborations that has led to public policy changes that we are implementing and helping voters and strengthening democracy in California. It needs to continue. And I think it's safe to say that every person in this room will do their part to ensure the resources necessary to continue this important work, myself included. And then take it one step further. It's not just important for the voters of California and for the state of California, but what we do here and how we do it here is setting the pace for the entire nation. Right? There's that old adage. There's that adage, so goes California, so goes the nation. Yes, it applies in elections too. It may not be clearly evident depending on the state you're looking at. It may not be clearly evident for maybe next year's elections, but in time, mark my words, the Golden State voting model is the model that will drive democracy for our country in the years ahead. And for that, you should be proud of yourselves. And so we will continue to innovate. We will continue to advance policy. We'll continue to work together on not just implementing, but then coming full circle, right? Let's evaluate how we're doing it and how we can improve upon it and keep strengthening our democracy. So glad to see that all reflected in today's agenda. I won't get into details on a couple of things. I'll focus my remarks so as to not steal the thunder from some tremendous speakers and panelists that you have, but if only there was a whole bank of reporters who can observe what happens after Election Day session, so that Sam doesn't have to be like a broken record reminding people why there's a canvass period and how many provisional ballots have yet to be processed and those sorts of things. I have personal interest in the emergency medical ballots, not because I was hospitalized during an election, but I was holding my wife's hand in a maternity ward when our middle boy was born during an LA City municipal election. And so I had to excuse myself to run out and vote the day after he was born and come back to the hospital. So we got to figure out better ways, and of course, the session focusing on census outreach in addition to the primary and general elections in 2020, because we all know how important the census is. And so I encourage you to explore all the partnerships and outreach infrastructure that you have as a county, as an organization. We're constantly putting out information on voter registration, how to do it, when, where, and how to vote. We need to keep those same outreach networks very, very active around the 2020 census because so much is at stake. But let me do a little bit of a deeper dive on just a couple of issues. First of all, election funding. We've talked about research and policy, the legislation we've worked together on, and going forward, the need to focus on implementation, proper implementation of a lot of what's been approved. Well, we know that a lot of it requires additional resources. And unfortunately, and I've been saying this across the country, it's no secret, we recognize that nationally and in California and locally, elections have been underfunded for far too long. Just take my office as one example. Our elections division, as great as they are, is a team of 34. For a state that has 58 counties and about 25 million eligible voters in this state, right? As we go county by county, whether you're a big county or a small county, maybe especially the small counties, we know that there are resource strains for you to do what we're asking of you. And as we continue to ask more of you with the various initiatives and policies that we are advocating for. So we need to also work together to advocate for those additional resources. But thank you in the meantime for rising to the occasion with your limited staff and limited resources to continue to take on the additional work and at times culture shift to move elections in California in the direction that we've laid out. It's important because as each and every one of you succeeds, the ultimate beneficiary are the voters of California, and we are certainly leading the way. Let me, before I jump into 2020 and beyond, take a moment to recap the 2018 election. This is still kind of fresh in my mind. 2018, I think you would agree, was a huge success, right? Let's remind ourselves of the numbers. Going into the November election, 19.7 million registered voters on the rolls. By the way, that was an increase of 2.5 million in 4 years. 2.5 million. Of those 19.7, 12.7 million voters showed up and cast their ballots. So it was a record by far turnout for a midterm election. When you look at the number of ballots cast, the turnout rate of 64.5% was the highest midterm election turnout since 1982. Huge, huge success. Within those numbers is 55,000. That's the number of California voters who took advantage of our same-day registration law. We call it conditional voter registration, but the bottom line is the same. 55,000 people who otherwise might not have been able to vote showed up and cast their ballots because of that. Our pre-registration program by the November election had more than 300,000 16 and 17-year-olds who had pre-registered to vote. 100,000 of them had turned 18 by election day and were eligible to cast their ballot. And as you'll hear more about today, the growing electorate, the more inclusive democracy showed a significant increase in turnout for young people, Latinos, and API voters. So there's a lot to be proud of from the 2018 election, a great warm-up going into 2020. 2018 was also the first year where California voters experienced the Voters' Choice Act, right? In those 5 counties who stepped up to the plate. Sacramento, Madera, Napa, Nevada, and San Mateo. Let's give them a round of applause. I won't get into the details, but you know that the Voters' Choice Act, I'm a big fan, and brings voters more choices of when, where, and how they cast their ballot through all the best practices and innovation that we've been discussing here today. But aside from increased turnout, right? The 5 Voters' Choice Act counties all had turnout rates that exceeded the statewide record turnout. That's a big deal, and that's a big indicator. Aside from just turnout, let me give you a same-day registration statistic. The 5 counties that adopted the VCA represented about 7% of the state's voters, but they represented over 32% of the voters who took advantage of same-day registration. So it works. In addition to the elections office, offering same-day registration at vote centers works. It helps enfranchise people, and we will continue to build upon that. And I'll leave the balance of that conversation for the first panel. But good news going into 2020 on the Voters' Choice Act. I want to applaud Los Angeles County for announcing they're adopting VCA. Orange County has announced, Mariposa, Fresno County have announced, and as of 2 days ago, Santa Clara County has adopted the VCA in time for 2020. So as you share it, I encourage you to be precise in how we share the following. It's not 10 of 58 counties that have adopted the VCA. It is 10. But these 10 counties make up half of the state's electorate. Half of the voters in California will have more options of when, where, and how to vote starting in 2020. Let's give that a round of applause. So 2018 was also the launch. We're coming up on the 1 year, I'll call it the birthday, not the anniversary, of California Motor Voter, automatic voter registration. Now, I know you've seen some headlines, so have I, talking about the rollout that was not exactly flawless or perfect. And I recognize that, and we're mindful of that, and we are addressing it. But do not let anybody tell you that the program has been anything than an overwhelming success. As we approach the birthday of California Motor Voter, let me share some more stats. And maybe even in sort of comparison and contrast. My first year as Secretary of State, all the voter registration activity that came through by way of DMV accounted for about 1.8 million new registrants and updated registration records. In the 1 year of California Motor Voter, it's 3.8 million people who have registered or updated their registration. New registrants alone, 1 million. 1 million people who were previously eligible but not registered. That is huge. We are moving the needle quickly and aggressively in extending the franchise to eligible Californians. And you're right, I am damn proud of that. It's a big reason why just a couple of weeks ago we announced that we now crossed the 20 million threshold of registered voters in the state of California. And I project that by next year's primary, we will be at 21 million. We might even get to 22 by the general election because of the impact of motor voter in addition to the political and nonprofit activity we see in communities throughout the state. Next, I want to talk about, it may be 6 minutes, not 5, okay? But it's about something very, very important. Again, I'm trying to address issues that are not going to be gone into depth in some of the panels, but cybersecurity. You know, you've heard me probably say it in different venues. 5 years ago when I was campaigning for secretary, we talked a lot about ideas for increasing registration rates and turnout rates, and we have a lot to show for it now. But in the last couple of years, not just us here in California, but frankly around the country and around the world, we have had our attentions refocused on election security concerns, cyber and otherwise. And so want to put it in the proper context for you. We all care about it as elections administrators, but having just testified last month in the House Homeland Security Committee, both in those discussions and in preparation, and our ongoing discussions with federal intelligence partners, we know that the defense of our democracy is a matter of national security and national concern, which is why I tell our federal partners that's why we need significant federal support and funding to be able to implement the proper policies, procedures, and infrastructure and defense of that infrastructure, along with training and everything else that we do together. But we're not seeing that level of investment. The last time there was significant federal investment in modernizing our elections was after the 2000 presidential election and the debacle in Florida. It was 17 years ago when Congress acted on a bipartisan basis when they approved the Help America Vote Act. That was 17 years ago. By and large, across California and across the country, the investments made as a result were in equipment and technology that today is now about 20 years old, right? That is not acceptable. You would not settle for a 20-year-old television in your house. You would not settle for a 20-year-old phone in your pocket. But when it comes to elections infrastructure, I'm not saying everybody, but far too common, that's the case when it comes to our elections throughout California and throughout the country. So we need additional investment. Now, those same members of Congress said, wait a minute, didn't we just appropriate $380 million last year? Yeah, they did. California's share was about $34 million. It was helpful, but by no means was it enough. And let's be specific as to what last year's appropriation was. It was not new money. It was money that was approved to address butterfly ballots, not 2020 cyber security threats. Right? If you stop and look at it, it's going to sound harsh, but it is accurate. The United States Congress did a lot more to address hanging Chads than to address Vladimir Putin and Russian intelligence attacks on our democracy in the 2016 election. We have to do better. So in addition to this $34 million that we got from the federal government, we all have been celebrating the $134 million that the state of California, the legislature and the governor, stepped up and appropriated in the current fiscal year budget. $134 million for voting system upgrades and replacement. Yes, there's that dollar for dollar match requirement for each county, but to me that means fully leveraged. We're talking about a $268 million investment in our elections infrastructure. Again, very helpful, very timely, not enough. And so we're working with the Newsom administration in requesting an additional round of funding in the next fiscal year budget. So I would ask that you all stay tuned on that. So as we've, yes, maybe he can hear us. He's back from El Salvador. So between the policy that we've been sharing, between the technical best practices that we are very well aware of now because of our partnerships, we know what we need to do. We need the resources to be able to do it. And because there's resources on the table, I took the additional step, if you haven't heard it already, this is for the non-registrars in the room, of announcing the decertification of older voting systems in California that have not been tested and certified to the most recent standards. Right? We upgraded our standards in 2015 to the security requirements that we should have for our voting systems. The good news is about 20 counties have since then upgraded or replaced their voting systems to meet the newer, higher standards, with several others somewhere in the procurement process. But we need everybody, all Californians, to benefit from up-to-date, modern, most secure voting systems. There's money on the table to do it, and I've asked that every county make their transition by next year's primary election, because the election is so important. On the topic of election security, I want to also cover one other area, because it's not all just about technology. And it's not all just about cyber security training and some of the things that we've done in partnership for our state election staff and county election staff at multiple conferences. It's also about the disinformation that we are hearing more and more about. There's the two big takeaways from the 2016 election, right? Were any voting systems compromised? Were votes flipped or changed? That's one area of conversation, and I think we're doing a good job of addressing that. But the other is the bad information that circulates, not just, but especially on social media. Because if it undermines public confidence in our elections, that is bad for our democracy. And so we have no choice but to try to do what we can to address that. Again, I think the legislature and the governor, when they appropriated for this fiscal year budget money for the creation of an Office of Enterprise Risk Management within the Secretary of State and the Office of Election Cybersecurity. And so I'll cover just a couple of the initiatives that we were able to deploy very quickly as a result. Now, we know there's bad information that's out there, and so there's both a responsive element and a proactive element to what we try to do about it. On the proactive side, we developed the ability, this may not sound revolutionary, but the ability to email directly from the Secretary of State to voters across California, the more than 6 million voters who have given us their email and their permission to communicate with them. So that was one step. We crafted advertising, both still graphics and videos, that we then funded on those very same social media platforms where they may get erroneous information. We're trying to make the first impression and remind voters of where they should be going for the official, reliable, trusted sources of information. Not just the Secretary of State's office, but their county elections department. So we try to get ahead of the bad information with the good information. On the responsive side, we were able to invest both in eyeballs to monitor and some software tools to monitor those social media platforms for the bad information. And just to give an example of a little bit of an impact that had, in the days leading up to the November election, we identified what to us was pretty clear, about 300 misleading, erroneous posts, tweets, Instagram items, et cetera, that we then were able to bring to the attention of those social media platforms because we had established those contacts, created the protocols for reporting items to them. Upon their review, they made the choice to remove 98% of that material promptly, right? So we're able to minimize the impact that bad information has, but only because we made a concerted effort to try to do that. By the way, that wasn't just the first time in California that was done. We were the first in the nation, and to this day, we're the only state in the nation that has that sort of initiative. But I know I've fielded calls from other states and other secretaries seeking more information because they see how valuable it was, how helpful it was, and they're seeking to replicate it in other states now. We also toted up a whole web portal, votesure.sos.ca.gov, to provide voters the tools they need, not just where do I find my polling place, so you don't have to believe the bad information. Other questions, the ability to verify their registration status, and even a dedicated email where they too can report suspicious items that they may find in news outlets or social media so that we can consider and act on that. And finally, we piloted our voter status alert. So several of the counties, you know who you are, I'll just name them: Madera, Napa, Orange, Sacramento, San Mateo, San Bernardino, and Solano. The voters in those counties benefited from this pilot voter status alert, which is kind of like when you do something with your bank account, right? Your bank will send you an email, hey, the funds have been transferred. So if it was you, you get confirmation. And if it wasn't you, you better call and figure this out and address it. Well, similarly, if there's a change in the voter record, the voter now automatically receives a notification that there was a change to their record. So if that was them, okay, it's been processed. If not, okay, there's an issue that needs to be addressed. And we're bringing this voter status alert statewide in time for the 2020 election. So we got a lot going on, right? We got a lot going on. Let me wrap up with the following, because some of the reforms that we have championed and have succeeded with from a voter rights standpoint and a voter enfranchisement standpoint also serve a security purpose, believe it or not. Consider just 3 examples. Same-day registration. Well, yeah, it's very helpful. More than 50,000 people took advantage of it. It can be convenient if you miss the deadline. It's not just that. Imagine if there was actually some sort of incident that threatened the quality and accuracy of voter rolls in a particular county or in many areas of the state. Well, through conditional voter registration, any voter who's eligible still has the opportunity to exercise their right to vote through same-day registration. That's a very good insurance policy for us. Vote by mail, right? Well, yes, we know that's been increasingly popular in California for a long, long time now. But first of all, because when you vote by mail, you're not voting electronically, it's pen and paper, right? You can't hack a piece of paper. And we've even removed the postage requirement, so that's one less obstacle between people being able to cast their ballot. And even the concept of vote centers, right? Don't get me started about VCA, but vote centers, heaven forbid there's a security issue or other reliability issue on any particular voting location, when you give voters the flexibility to vote anywhere in the county, they can continue to seamlessly exercise their right to vote without it being a huge issue for a particular county of how do we relocate this particular polling place and uniquely those voters that are impacted. So it is a win-win. Our elections can be secure and can be increasingly accessible. That's a win-win. Those are not mutually exclusive. I know I'm probably over time at this point, so I will wrap it up just by stating the obvious. You know, we're in the democracy business and we're in the election security business. Those who seek to undermine our elections or public confidence in our elections are continuing to do so with increased frequency and increased sophistication. And so, therefore, our defenses have to do the same. We got to keep up. I think my colleague in Minnesota, Secretary of State Steve Simon, puts it best. He says, election security is like running a race without a finish line, right? It's not good enough just to get into first place. You got to stay in first place and stay and stay and stay and stay. We know we can do that, but that requires us constantly thinking, innovating, scrutinizing, testing, and improving. It means continuing to work together. So I need y'all to be around for a long, long time. And it requires us to make the necessary investments at the federal, at the state, and at the local level. So that too is part of our advocacy agenda. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you again today. At this point, I think we're going to take a couple of quick questions, and then you get to peace, too. And then I get the honor again of administering the oath to the new members of the LAC and the VAC. So stay tuned for that. Get your cameras ready.
Right. One of the things that is now going to happen is that any voter whose absentee ballot or provisional ballot has been isn't confirmed will now be notified so they can correct that. And I know it took a little bit of legal action, but I'm very pleased that that's going to happen. And what we need is to make that a federal rule, not just a state rule. But thank you for that.
No, absolutely. I brag about that too everywhere I go, especially places like Georgia and Florida. Well, we covered it all, right? All right. Well, thank you again very much. Members of the LAC and the VAC, please join me here next to the stage.